In 2022, Apple's net sales reached an astounding $395 billion US dollars. And out of that, 50% of Apple's revenue is from iPhone sales alone. The iPhone is Apple's most popular product and has a total of over a billion users worldwide. And while the tech giant is synonymous with Silicon Valley, Apple relies on someone else, China. 98% of iPhones are manufactured in China. And Apple isn't the only company. Anything from electronics to toys to even clothes could be manufactured in China. And in 2018, China accounted for around 20% of the United States' total imports. Despite the United States' bitterness towards the Chinese Communist Party, it's very hard for the United States to turn around from China, and it comes down to cost. China has some of the cheapest manufacturing costs in the world, amongst other business-friendly regulations. This is in part to China's massive population of 1.4 billion people. With that massive of a population in such a densely populated area, more people are looking for work. This large supply of workers, coupled with fewer jobs in the population, means that more people are willing to work for less pay. Besides, China has less strict policies around minimum wage than the West, so companies can get work done for a lot cheaper than in other places. And to the concern of human rights organizations, China has enlisted child laborers into its workforce, which only increases the amount of workers that can get paid less. Ultimately, when companies are just looking for the margins that will give them the most profits, China's relatively large and stable workforce that is willing to do work for cheap seems like a pretty good bet. This leads to a majority of products that consumers in the West buy and use every day, including the iPhone, has had a significant amount of manufacturing done in China. If China were to cut off US and other Western companies amidst geopolitical rivalries, companies like Apple and Google would take a serious hit. This was somewhat seen during the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, which shut down manufacturing across China and the world. The Chinese government had some of the most strict quarantines and shutdowns in the world, and during COVID surges, manufacturing was shut down entirely in China. Amidst the shutdowns, exports out of China, mainly in technology, fell considerably. Smartphones saw a minus 10% change in manufacturing during the pandemic. Whilst it doesn't seem like a lot, that meant that millions of phones were not being manufactured. During the pandemic, we also saw chip manufacturing shutdowns in China. The biggest computer chip manufacturer in the United States, Intel, manufactures some of its products in China. During the pandemic, this production was halted. This had a ripple effect across the entire supply chain. The computer chip is at the basis of every piece of modern technology, from smartphones to cars to planes. Because of these shortages, this meant that millions of cars, smartphones, TVs, and laptops were not able to be produced. In the West, this led to sellouts, high prices, and less consumer goods overall. But China's dominance over semiconductors and technology goes deeper than just consumer goods. Because computer chips are the root for all modern technology, this includes military technology as well. This means that the technology powering the United States and other Western countries' weapons and military vehicles are at the mercy of China, the United States' greatest political rival. If China were to suddenly restrict the United States' access to said technology, the United States military would be hurt drastically. For better or for worse, China has a massive control over the supply chain. However, China's international reach and control goes farther and deeper than just manufacturing. Look at this map of the world. It shows the dominant trading partners across the planet. Blue represents the United States and red represents China. In 1980, the world's biggest markets, including North America, Europe, India, Japan, and Australia, all dominantly traded with the United States. A majority of South America, including Brazil and Argentina, also traded mostly with the United States. In 1980, China had very little reach in international trade compared to the US. But as the years pass, this starts to change. By the late 1980s, Germany began trading more with China than the United States, but this was only the beginning. In the early 1990s, the Soviet Union also collapsed, which led to the formation of several countries across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Being relatively poor and in close proximity with China, a lot of these countries looked to China as a cheaper trading partner. But for the most part, the United States at this point had firm control over the Americas, Europe, Africa, and Australia. But at the turn of the century, things start to shift. Look at the map in 2000. See how the United States is still a much larger trading partner? Well, just 10 years later, this is far from reality. Australia, Africa, South America, and even parts of Europe have increased trade with China. And in 2018, even more countries sway in the favor of China. Nearly all of Asia, Oceania, and Africa trade more with China than the United States. China is aware of this and is doing all they can to gain more control over international trade. China sought this control in the form of its Belt and Road Initiative. Revealed by China in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative is a link between the economies of China and other regions across Africa and Eurasia in a new Silk Road economic belt and maritime Silk Road. Along with these, the Belt and Road Initiative also saw the creation of the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank and Silk Road Fund. All of these creations have been heavily invested in by China, with Beijing investing a total of $155 billion into the project. Ultimately, China aims to use the Belt and Road Initiative to counter U.S. hegemony and expand her presence in Asia. Countries including Cambodia, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka have all taken part in the Belt and Road Initiative. In Cambodia, investments from China led China to gain the Koh Kong port. As part of the contract for this investment, the Chinese company in charge of the investments has a 100% equity stake for 99 years on 45,000 hectares of land. China built a naval base in the Koh Kong province. This greatly increased China's military presence in Southeast Asia. Along with the naval base, China plans to build more infrastructure on the land that will essentially turn the port into a sort of Chinese proxy city. In Pakistan, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor links China to Pakistan through the Gwadar port. China came to a deal with Pakistan surrounding the port that includes a 43-year lease of the port to China. Furthermore, China gets 91% of its revenue from the port. This is a crucial move for China. It gives China access to the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most crucial points on Earth for the trade of oil. One of the most crucial members of the Belt and Road Initiative is Sri Lanka. Throughout the 2000s, China has loaned Sri Lanka billions of dollars for infrastructure projects. After the Sri Lankan Civil War, the country relied on China heavily for loans for reconstruction. All these loans led to Sri Lanka being billions of dollars deep in debt to China. When Sri Lanka was unable to pay back these loans and defaulted, they had to agree to give China a 99-year lease with an 80% revenue split on the Hambantota port, which is an extremely important port in the Indian Ocean. China's control of the port gives them a strategic foothold in the area. With just these three examples, it's obvious to see China's intentions with the Belt and Road Initiative. China's goal is not to help these countries develop as independent nations. Rather, China is using these loans to gain strategic territory in each of the countries. By establishing itself in this region, China is expanding its presence in Southern Asia through loans that make countries dependent on China. This keeps these countries within China's orbit, which is another strike against the United States. This is also a blow against China's geopolitical rival, India. China's takeover of Hambantota port in Sri Lanka is 100 kilometers from India, which moves China even closer, threatening India's dominance in the region. But China isn't only interested in South Asia. She wants to bring more of the world under her control. And so, the Chinese have been looking more into Africa to involve the continent in its Belt and Road Initiative. Outside of the Arab nations in the north and a few outliers like South Africa or Botswana, most of sub-Saharan Africa is relatively poor and underdeveloped. This makes it an excellent space for the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. One such nation that fell under the initiative was Uganda. Despite being rich in precious metals, Uganda doesn't have the financial means necessary to translate their resources into economic tools. And also being a landlocked country in Central Africa, Uganda doesn't have access to international trade through shipping. Because of this geographic problem, Uganda has looked to make their international airport, Entebbe International Airport, a major hub in the region. However, Uganda doesn't have the financial ability to make improvements to the airport infrastructure to sustain being a regional hub. So, Uganda looked to China for loans. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China loaned Uganda the money necessary to improve the airport's infrastructure. Just like other members of the initiative, Uganda was unable to pay back the loans. As a result, China took control of the airport. This put China firmly in control of Uganda. Any trade that Uganda conducts internationally has to be done through their airport, which China controls. As a result, Uganda does most of their trade with China. Kenya almost lost the port of Mombasa to China, the biggest international seaport in East Africa. Losing that port would cripple Kenya economically and further deepen China's control over Africa. This initiative, along with the trade it provides for most of the world and cheap manufacturing for large companies, are how China is able to control our planet. All of this pinnacles in the different politics between China and the West. China has had a long and complicated history. For centuries, China has been dominated by the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty was the last in a long list of imperialistic dynasties that ruled China for centuries. In the beginning of the 20th century, the Qing dynasty began losing its power in the region. The victory over Japan over Russia in the Russo-Japanese Wars in the early 1900s gave Japan more political control in East Asia and served to weaken the Qing dynasty even more. In October 1911, the people overthrew the imperialistic Qing dynasty that had ruled China since the 1600s in favor of a republican government that aligned with the West. However, this didn't last long. The republican government failed to modernize China to the people's wishes, and the new government became more unpopular. This culminated in 1919, when the German-occupied province of Shandong was given to the rising Japanese Empire rather than China. The Chinese people saw this as a betrayal from their government and the West. At the same time, Western ideas like socialism were becoming increasingly more popular amongst the Chinese people. In the early 1920s, the Chinese Communist Party was founded on the basis of Marxism and communism. In the 1940s, the Chinese Communist Revolution saw the victory of Mao Zedong and the People's Liberation Army over the Republic of China. The remaining imperialists fled to the island of Taiwan, which remains a Republic of China to this day. In the decades since the revolution, China has remained a one-party, authoritarian communist state under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. This has caused major rifts between China and the United States. In the 1930s, China and the United States were geopolitical allies against the imperialist and expansionist Japanese Empire. During the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1932 and the subsequent war crimes against the Chinese people, the United States supported China by providing supplies and sanctioning Japan. From here, however, U.S.-Chinese relations only pointed downhill. The second half of the 20th century was dominated by the Cold War and the battle between capitalism and communism. Despite being a communist country, China wasn't a Soviet ally. Rather, they saw Soviet expansionism as a threat. However, the United States still viewed China as a geopolitical threat and tried to sway the region to support the West and capitalism. After Japan surrendered in 1945, the United States occupied Japan for 7 years, all but ensuring its support as a U.S. ally. In both the Korean and Vietnam Wars, the United States backed the capitalist South against the communist and Chinese-backed North. These crucial decades of fighting have left a political strangle on the entirety of East Asia. In the West and United States supporting Japan and South Korea, opposing communist North Korea, Vietnam, and China. As a result, China has been looking to gain more power in the region by expanding its sphere of influence through its Belt and Road Initiative. But the more pressing concern at the moment is Taiwan. Since the rise of the Chinese Communist Party in 1949, the Republic of China and Taiwan have been a thorn in China's side. But as China looks to gain more influence, the West is becoming more increasingly worried about Chinese aggression against Taiwan. In 1999, the British lease of Hong Kong ended and the province was given back to China. Since then, China has been integrating Hong Kong back into itself and no doubt intends to reunify completely. And there's no doubt the same will happen with Taiwan. This year, China has been increasing its military and looks as though it could invade Taiwan at any moment. Unfortunately, there's not much the United States could do without starting another Cold War or World War III. Through the supply chain, the United States economy relies too much on Chinese manufacturing to aid Taiwan. Whilst companies like Apple have been looking to move its manufacturing to neighboring countries, a large majority of it remains in China, meaning that consumer goods that the entire world buys are in China's hands. Moving forward, it will be interesting to see how events play out with the United States and the Communist Party's different political interests.